Hi everyone, welcome to HUSO 2075, Social and Political Theory. My name's Nicole Pepperell. It's my voice for the most part that you'll be hearing on lectures this term. And what I want to do with this lecture is talk in very general terms about some of the core concepts in the course. I want to talk about the question of what is theory and explore some various theorist responses to that question, and to get you started to think about how you would like to use theory yourself in your professional work and your academic work from this point. Now, one of the things that often happens with this course, some of you will come in and you'll be really fluent with theoretical material, but many of you will come in with anxieties about theory of different sorts. Common anxieties are for people to say this is really abstract, it's completely removed from anything that I intend to do, this is something that you might do in an academic context, but it has no practical use, this theoretical material. It sort of seems very difficult, it's complicated, it's hard to follow, and it feels for many people like it's something that goes on in a very specialized space. It's not something that they feel like they can use in a ready way in what they do in everyday practice. We're going to try in this course, if these are some of your anxieties about theoretical work, to talk to you about what the practical implications of the theory actually are, and also to equip you to read theoretical texts, to understand some of the references that often make those texts difficult to deal with. And in getting a little bit of that background, to realize that the theorists themselves, no matter how abstract they may sound when they're writing, are actually dealing with practical problems, and many of them over the term as we explore text will be dealing with the sorts of practical problems that you are dealing with yourself in your everyday work practice, in your personal practices as well. So we want to shift from the feeling that theory is something out there that other people do in a specialized space where people just like to think about ideas, to the notion that theory is actually a particular tool that people use, and in the right circumstances it can be a very powerful tool for dealing with practical problems. Sometimes you have to have a little bit of background to figure out what practical problems are being discussed, and then to be able to unpack the texts themselves and realize that most theorists understand themselves as having a very long conversation, as participating in a very long conversation, a conversation that goes back several hundred years in most cases. But it's a conversation about what we should do. It is a conversation about what kinds of actions we could take, and what the right actions are to take, given very pressing social problems. Okay, so there's a handout that goes with this lecture, and the handout has the quotations that I'm going to show you here, and it also provides you the citations where those quotations can originally be found. So if you want to backtrack and look at the context for these quotations and where they're said, if you're going to write one of your major assessments on this, or you're just curious, the handout provides you with the information to do that. While we're going through the quotations in this lecture, what I'd like you to be thinking about is, of the responses we're going to look at, these are theorists who are addressing people who are worried about theory. They're worried that it's not very practical, they're worried that it's not very useful, and these are theorists responding to those fears. Which of the responses applies or resonates most with you when you're thinking about your own professional or personal situation? You might want to think about how you want to approach theory this term in light of the various ways that these professional theorists approach it. And then how do you think you might be able to make use of particular theoretical skills or particular theoretical knowledge in your own practical work? Because this first one is not someone you'd normally think of as a theorist. It's T.S. Eliot. He's normally thought of in a kind of literary context. But it's addressing something that many people feel at first, and particularly with these works that we're dealing with in the first few weeks of the course, we'll be dealing with the canon, with a lot of very old texts, some of which are hard to read just because they're so old. Eliot has a little dialogue that he stages, where he says, someone says the dead writers are remote from us, because we know so much more than they did. And his response to that is precisely, and they are that which we know. Okay, so we move forward in time, we move beyond this canon of dead writers, but we do it in part because what we absorb are the things that those dead writers taught us. Okay, this is a bigger quote. This is John Maynard Keynes. Keynes is someone that we will encounter later in the course when we're talking about economic theory. He's a prominent economic theorist who's working early in the 20th century. And we'll look at some of the debates between him and someone named Hayek over planning the economy. Keynes is a figure that you would have run into in newspapers and in the press recently as well. With the global financial crisis, people began debating Keynesian economics again. This is that Keynes. He's writing, and the practical situation that he's got in the back of his head with this quote is the situation posed by figures like Hitler or Stalin, people who are running totalitarian, oppressive regimes. And he says, the ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they are right and when they are wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. Indeed, the world is ruled by little else. Practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influences are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. Madmen in authority who hear voices in the air are distilling their frenzy from some academic scribbler of a few years back. I'm sure that the power of vested interests is vastly exaggerated compared with the gradual encroachment of ideas. So he's addressing people who think they're too practical. They don't need this theoretical material. They don't need theoretical analysis. They're men of the world. And he's saying that when you do that, you in fact render yourself unable to know how much philosophical ideas, theories, economic, political, social, are actually governing what you do. All you've done is deprive yourself of the ability to recognize the influence the theory has. You've not actually shielded yourself from theoretical influence. And he's got dominant, frightening figures in the time that he's writing this that he thinks represents how this plays out. Okay, this is a different kind of quote. This is addressed to a more activist space. And it's about the criticism of stepping back from immediately doing things in order to theorize what's best to do. Michael Zinzun's saying, theory is necessary to figure out what's really going on. People always want to be a savior for the community. It's like they see a baby coming down the river and they want to jump in and save it. We need to stop being so reactive to the situations that confront us. Saving babies is fine for them, but we want to know who's throwing the goddamn babies in the water in the first place. Okay, so theory is a way of stepping back and working out what's actually causing the problem, rather than taking for granted that the problem is just going to be there, and you react to it, and you try to deal with its consequences. Theory here is a way of stepping back and trying to figure out if you can do a better job by getting to the bottom of what's causing the problems to which other people are just responding. This is coming from a similar sort of space. Oftentimes theory, particularly when it's looking at masses of data, the sort of data you need to look at statistically, the sorts of patterns that are not visible unless you step way back from them and look at them from a distance. And that kind of analysis is often perceived as very cold, and what we want are lived stories. We want immediate interactions. We want to let individual people's voices live through our work. This is a quote that's written in response to a major factory fire in the US that happened in 1911. Until the September 11 attacks, it was actually the largest disaster in New York City. And it was caused in circumstances very similar to those of the recent fire in Bangladesh that you may be aware of, where working class women were locked in to a factory. A fire broke out, and because of the locked doors, many of them weren't able to escape. And this is someone who is an activist at the time reflecting on the issue. She says, "And when the dead bodies of girls are found piled up against locked doors after a factory fire, who wants to hear about a grief relief fund? What we want to do is start a revolution. But we must pause and consider what are the essential weapons in our campaign. The first thing we need is information, complete and accurate information about the accidents that are happening. It seems a tame theme to drop so suddenly from talk of revolution to talk of statistics. But I believe in statistics just as firmly as I believe in revolution. And what is more, I believe statistics are good stuff to start a revolution with." So it's the same issue, that sometimes there is a value even when there is a huge overriding moral reason that we need to act, even when there's a perception that there's a great injustice. There's still a value in stepping back and trying to figure out what is going on. Why is it going on? What's the best thing to do about it? That's the revolutionary moment. This quote and the next quote are from contemporary theorists who are talking about their own practice as theorists. So this is Robert Nozick. We'll run into him again later in the term when we're dealing with responses to a major political theorist named Rawls. Nozick starts out here, it's a long quote, but he starts out with a kind of a theorist's eye view of bad kinds of theory. And a bad kind of theory for Nozick is a theory that treats things in a very cookie-cutter way, that wants to give you a really pristine image of the process of making a theory, and in the process it kind of wrests everything into too neat a shape. And he's going to propose that theory doesn't have to be like that, that you can expose all the uncertainty, that you can expose all of the messiness of the process, still get value out of theory and get a better kind of theory by doing that. So he says, one form of philosophical activity feels like pushing and shoving things to get them to fit some fixed perimeter of specified shape. All those things are lying out there and they must be fit in. You push and shove the material into the rigid area, getting it into the boundary on one side and it bulges out on another. You run round and press in the protruding bulge, producing yet another in another place. It's a lovely image, this. You're trying to shove all the facts into place, shove all the things we know into place, and if you do it too neatly, they just keep squishing out the sides. So you push and shove and clip off corners from the things so that they'll fit, and you press in until finally almost everything sits unstably, more or less in there. What doesn't gets heaved far away so that it won't be noticed. Of course, it's not all that crude. There's also the coaxing and cajoling and the body English. Quickly you find an angle from which it looks like an exact fit and take a snapshot at a fast shutter speed before something else bulges out too noticeably. Then back to the darkroom to touch up the rents, rips, and tears in the fabric of the perimeter. All that remains is to publish the photograph as a representation of exactly how things are, and to note how nothing fits properly into any other shape. Okay? He is reflecting from a theorist's own point of view a kind of dishonest practice, where you take a snapshot. It's the thing that everybody's afraid of about theory. It suppresses all the mess, it suppresses the process of getting the theory itself constructed. It makes everything too clean and too neat, and it's dishonest. And he says, by contrast, I propose to give it all to you, the doubts and the worries and uncertainties, as well as the beliefs, convictions, and arguments. Many of the texts we're going to read this term have this perspective, that theory is a messy, complicated process, and these authors are going to visibly try to make that mess visible to you. But not all of the texts are like that, and so we'll use our class discussion with each other to uncover the beliefs, the convictions, and the arguments, the things that the individual text may not reflect, but the discussion as a whole is going to reflect. There's a tendency when people are new to theoretical material to want to treat these texts as authorities, as people who are sort of in possession of objective fact. But in reality, when you practice as a theorist, whether it's in social or political theory, you're involved in a big set of debates with other people. You're arguing with people, and you take the existence of the debate and other people's knowledge of the debate sort of for granted. The other perspectives are out there, they're published, and you figure people can find those if they want them. But when you're new looking in, sometimes things are written with such confidence that you wouldn't guess that there's this enormous contestation going on in the background. So one of the things that we'll do in this course is offer a very wide range of readings that no individual person in the course is going to read, but that collectively we can read, and we can share information and get a feel for the messiness, the contentious quality, the debated quality. So it's a shift from thinking here is a text and it is an authoritative, reliable source and I can just quote what it's saying and give a page number and cite it and that's that, to recognizing that these are texts that are making an argument, and the argument may be stronger or weaker, and that has to be pulled apart. And often we rely on reading other competing forms of theory to pull it apart. And finally we've got this from Raewyn Connell. Raewyn Connell is probably one of the most prominent Australian sociologists and she touches on sociology and political theory. We're going to start off this week reading a chapter from one of her works, but this is actually from her website, and again it's reflecting on the practice of being a theorist. She says, social theory is not well regarded outside the academic world. Impractical waffle, thinly disguised ideology, or pretentious restatements of common knowledge. This is the reputation. Okay, so no one who does theory is unaware that people think it's impractical, that they're worried that it's ideological, that they're worried that it doesn't do anything useful. Connell says some of it's well-deserved. Inside the academy, however, theory has prestige. Foucault, Bourdieu, Habermas, going a little further back, Keynes, Lévi-Strauss. So again, long conversations. Already here we're referring back to Keynes. Foucault, Bourdieu, and Habermas are figures that we're going to meet in the coming weeks. These, she says, are names to conjure with. Theory is about going beyond the given. Again, this idea that there is a value in stepping beyond what immediately seems to be the case. There is a value in not just reacting to things, which means taking them for granted and responding to them, but there's a value in working out what is the contingency of those things. Can we change them? Can we do something more fundamental? Or can we at least understand things in a deeper way? It involves, she says, an exercise of imagination as well as an exercise of reason. It is a way social science reaches out to the wider world, but it has to connect with empirical knowledge and problems of practice, and that makes good theory hard to do. Okay, so one of the things we'll do in this course is unpack what is the empirical knowledge, what are the problems of practice that the theory is connecting with. Theorists are always concerned with practical issues. Okay, the question sometimes is just figuring out how they are and what they mean, because they may take for granted that the people reading them know these names to conjure with, know that if they mention Foucault, they've got this kind of practical problem in mind. If they mention Habermas, they've got that kind of practical problem in mind. So we'll be equipping you to get some of the background necessary to follow these discussions, to pin down the practical implications, so that you're then in a position to think about the theory that underlies your own practice and the things that affect your practice. Now, one other thing I want to say before ending this component of the lectures for the week is I want to draw a distinction between what I've sometimes called capital T theory and small t theory. We're going to study a lot of capital T theory. This is Raewyn Connell's names to conjure with. These are the canon. They are major or important or influential works. They're produced in formal settings, whether they're in universities or in government organizations or in other kinds of professional settings. And a lot of academic and professional writing presupposes that you have some familiarity with at least the biggest and most influential works that are capital T theory. So we're going to cover that. We're going to demystify some of that and make you more familiar with and more aware of the important names in that area. But the larger goal is not, in fact, to equip you with a whole bunch of names of people and schools of thought so that you can sort of take a multiple choice test that talks about, who thinks what. The larger goal is actually to use that discussion of these big and influential works of the canon to get you to think about small t theory. And small t theory is something that we all engage with every day as part of our personal lives and our professional practice. We assess situations, we make judgments, we orient our practice based on how we interpret the situation at hand. Good professional practice requires this. But what are the assumptions and presuppositions that lie behind those practices, your own practices and other people's practices? We're going to try to use this course to give you an opportunity to use the very formal theories that we'll be reading to reflect on these more informal or everyday possibilities for thinking about theory. Okay, what sorts of small t theories lie behind the policies that are being passed that affect your profession or your discipline? What sorts of small t theories are motivating the behavior of your colleagues or your clients? What sorts of small t theories are causing you to decide that particular courses of action are the right courses to take in particular circumstances? We're going to be looking at all those things as we go through the course, and there are different sorts of assessments to help you both with gaining a mastery with the sort of big T theory texts that we're going to read and the canons and the sort of more formal works, and to give you an opportunity to reflect back on the small T theory of your own practice.